once you figure out your space, then the next thing to figure out is which camera would you like to have. And I was really thinking between Sony and Canon. And so for me, I was thinking about it more of like Android versus Apple analogy, whereas Sony has a messy UI, it has an open architecture, anyone can make lenses, there's less quality control. You can customize Sony UI, the hotkey buttons, all sorts of stuff, and you can get really in the nitty gritty on things you'd never be able to do. Whereas Canon is restrictive on people producing their lenses, high quality control. I think as of last year, Sigma was just able to start producing lenses. So before that, it was just Canon. And so there's high quality, but there's also high costs because there's not that many competitors in the market and you're only buying like the highest quality lens. The UI is very clean, but also doesn't allow that much more customization. It doesn't allow very much customization when you compare it against Sony. And so those are like kind of the two differences. And then there's the Nikon Z30, which is interesting. But I was really in between the Sony ZV-E10 Mark 1 and then the Canon EOS R50 were my two competitors of each other. And the Mark 1 is an older generation camera compared to the Mark II, which is newer. The Mark II has got a better sensor. It's more, I would say, closer relation to the R50 than the Mark 1 is to the R50. When you compare the Mark 1 to the R50 crushes the Mark 1 pretty much across the board when it comes to sensor capabilities, color range, naturalness of color, to autofocus, to pretty much across the board crushes Sony on like that camera to camera, because the R50 is newer than the Mark 1. But what the Mark 1 does have is probably one of the most important settings is the auto power off temp setting to high. So unless you have that setting in your camera, if you just have it set to auto, your camera might turn off in 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And so if you're on a 30-minute podcast or doing something like that, your camera just straight up will just turn off because it overheats. And so these cameras, unless they have an internal fan, they overheat. And that's a problem because if you're doing a podcast, you don't want your camera to turn off, especially if you're doing a video podcast or if you've got guests. All of that, Canon doesn't allow you to turn it off. Canon doesn't have a setting to where you can change when it deems it's too hot to work. They might have something where it turns it off when it gets like slightly, like turn off the setting, auto turn off when it gets warm in your hand. I think you can do that, but Sony takes it to extreme to where you can turn it to high, and basically that means like unless the stuff's like on the brink of melting, we're not going to turn off, which is huge. And then I talked about before the thought process about the mounting architecture. Sony uses the E-mount, created the E-mount system, basically open sourced it a long time ago. There's a lot of third-party offerings with high-quality lenses. The used market is massive. It is like the most established lens market, especially used lenses. And Sony's belief was, hey, the body isn't where the value is. The body is the lenses. And so if you can create a valuable lens market, then people would stick with the body, which I think was a good approach because other companies that didn't have that approach are adapting that methodology, like Canon. Like last year, they started allowing Sigma to produce their lenses with their mount. Before that, they would just get sued into oblivion, so no one would do that. But now Sony's got a really good lens ecosystem for used lenses, new lenses, the whole 9 yards. That drives innovation, better lenses. probably less quality control because there's more people. But collective intelligence, in my opinion, is always better than individual brilliance.